Ever think about how something as simple as a parking meter
Yeah.
could have a story so wild
Hmm.
it'd make your head spin?
For sure.
Well, buckle up,
All right.
because today
Okay.
we're diving deep into the saga of Chicago's parking meters.
Oh.
A tale of billion-dollar deals, international intrigue, and some serious consequences for the city and its people.
Absolutely.
It all started back in 2008.
Okay.
Can you set the scene for us?
Yeah, so picture this. The global financial crisis is in full swing,
Oh, yeah.
and Chicago is staring down a massive budget deficit.
Right.
Then Mayor Daley is in a tough spot,
Hmm.
desperately searching for a way to plug that financial hole.
Okay.
And that's where this seemingly simple idea comes into play
Okay.
of selling the city's parking meters.
Selling off the city's parking meter
You got it.
to try to raise some funds.
Exactly.
Wow.
Yep.
And we're not talking about just a few meters here.
Yeah.
We're talking 36,000 of them,
That's right.
leased out for a staggering 75 years.
75 years.
That's longer than most people's lifetimes.
It is.
So was this a stroke of genius
Whoa.
or a desperate gamble?
On the surface, it seemed like a quick and easy solution.
Okay.
The city gets a big chunk of cash up front,
Right.
$1.15 billion to be exact,
Wow.
and a private company takes on the responsibility of managing and maintaining the meters.
Okay. So who is this private company?
So enter Chicago Parking Meters, LLC.
Chicago Parking Meters LLC.
CPM LLC for short.
Okay.
This company, formed specifically for this deal,
Mm-hmm.
had some serious financial firepower behind it,
Oh, yeah.
with giants like Morgan Stanley involved.
Morgan Stanley. Wow.
Yep.
Okay. So we've got a city in a financial bind
Right.
and a private company with deep pockets
Mhm.
ready to cut a deal.
Ready to make it happen.
But I'm guessing things weren't quite as straightforward as they first appeared.
You guessed right.
Okay.
This deal wasn't just about handing over some meters.
Okay.
It came with a whole host of conditions and clauses. That, in hindsight, would come back to haunt the city.
Ooh, foreshadowing.
A little bit.
Okay.
Take, for instance, the lost revenue clause.
Lost revenue.
Essentially, this clause stipulated that if the city did anything,
Mm-hmm.
that resulted in parking spaces being unavailable.
Okay.
Think street festivals,
Yeah.
construction projects, or even the addition of bike lanes.
Interesting.
It would have to compensate CPM LLC for the projected loss in parking revenue.
Hold on.
Yeah.
So the city was essentially handcuffed.
In a way, yeah.
They couldn't even make changes to their own street
It was tricky.
without potentially facing a financial penalty.
Yes.
That sounds like a recipe for disaster
Mhm.
when it comes to urban planning and adapting to the changing needs of a city.
Precisely.
Yeah,
And that's where the cracks in this deal started to show.
Yeah.
The city, eager for that immediate cash infusion,
Right.
seemed to overlook the long-term implications of this clause,
Yeah.
and it would have far-reaching consequences for how Chicago developed in the years to come.
Wow.
Remember, we're not just talking about a few years here.
Right.
This was a 75-year lease.
75 years. That's a lifetime.
It is.
So the city was locked into this agreement,
They were.
even as their needs and priorities changed.
Exactly.
I'm starting to see how this seemingly simple parking meter deal
Yeah.
turned into a much bigger and more complicated story.
Absolutely.
It's a classic case of short-term gain
Right.
for long-term pain.
Yes.
And we haven't even gotten to the human impact yet.
That's right.
Think about the average Chicago resident
Yeah.
who suddenly saw their parking rates skyrocket.
Oh, yeah.
We're talking a jump from 25 cents an hour
Right.
to $1,
$1 an hour.
and even higher in some areas today.
That's right.
That's a significant increase,
It is.
especially when you consider that many people rely on their cars
Absolutely.
to get around the city.
Right.
So not only was the city hamstrung in terms of urban planning,
Yeah.
but residents were hit with a hefty price hike.
Uh-huh.
It sounds like this deal was a lose-lose situation for Chicago.
It seemed that way. Yeah.
But what about CPM LLC?
Ew.
Were they living the high life?
Let's just say they weren't complaining.
Okay.
Fast forward to 2023,
Yeah.
and CPM LLC has already recouped their initial $1.15 billion investment
Wow.
and pocketed an additional $500 million in profit.
Goodness.
And remember, they still have over 60 years left on that lease.
Oh my gosh.
The profits are essentially guaranteed.
So they're just raking it in,
Pretty much.
regardless of what happens in the city.
Regardless.
Okay, now I'm really starting to see why this deal is considered so controversial.
Yeah.
It's like Chicago sold off a piece of its future for a quick fix.
Right.
And the consequences are still being felt today.
They are.
But who exactly are the players behind CPM LLC?
Well,
Was it just Morgan Stanley calling the shots?
it turns out the story of who owns Chicago's parking meters
Okay.
is a journey in itself, with a cast of characters that stretches far beyond Chicago's city limits.
Oh.
We've got Wall Street giants, international investors,
Right.
even a connection to the Middle East.
Wow.
But that, my friend, is a tale for part 2 of our deep dive.
Oh, man, what a cliffhanger. All right, so we left off with this cliffhanger.
Yeah.
Who exactly owns Chicago's parking meters?
Right.
You mentioned Wall Street,
Uh-huh.
international investors,
Yes,
and even connection to the Middle East.
that's right.
Spill the tea.
Well, you're right to be intrigued.
Okay.
The list of investors in CPM LLC
Okay.
reads like a who's who of the financial world.
All right.
There's Morgan Stanley, as we mentioned.
Right.
But the plot thickens
Okay.
when you add the Abu Dhabi Investment Authority to the mix.
Wait, hold up.
Yeah.
The Abu Dhabi Investment Authority.
That's them.
That's the sovereign wealth fund of the United Arab Emirates, right?
That's right.
What in the world
Yeah.
are they doing investing in Chicago parking meters?
It might seem strange at first glance,
Uh-huh.
but sovereign wealth funds are always on the lookout
Okay.
for stable,
Yeah.
long-term investments.
Right.
And what could be more stable
Yeah.
than a 75-year lease
Right.
on tens of thousands of parking meters
Wow.
in a major city?
I guess that makes sense.
Yeah,
From a purely financial perspective.
it does.
But it's still wild to think about
Yeah,
how a simple parking transaction in Chicago
right.
could be funding who knows what in Abu Dhabi.
Yeah,
It really highlights the interconnectedness of global finance,
it does.
doesn't it?
It really does.
And the ownership structure itself
Yes.
has shifted over time,
It has.
adding another layer to this intricate web.
Exactly.
So Morgan Stanley eventually sold a large chunk of their stake.
It did.
And now the majority stakeholder
Mm-hmm.
is a company called D-Side Investments, Inc.
D-Side Investments, Inc.
D-Side Investments.
Yeah.
Tell me more about them. Are they another financial behemoth like Morgan Stanley?
Not quite.
Okay.
D-Side Investments is actually owned by 2 private investors
Okay.
based in Florida.
So from Wall Street
Yeah.
to the Middle East
Uh-huh.
and now to Florida,
That's right.
the ownership of Chicago's parking meters
Yep.
has taken quite a journey.
Quite a journey.
It's like a financial thriller.
It is.
But instead of stolen diamonds,
Right.
we're talking about parking meters.
Parking meters, yeah.
But all this financial maneuvering aside,
Okay.
let's get back to the impact on Chicago itself.
All right.
We talked about skyrocketing parking rates
Yeah.
and the city's inability to adapt its urban planning.
Uh-huh.
Were there any other consequences that we haven't touched on yet?
This deal didn't exactly happen quietly.
Okay.
There was a huge public outcry.
Oh, really?
When the details came to light,
Oh, wow.
people were understandably furious about the rate hikes
Yeah.
and the loss of control over their city's streets.
Right.
And it wasn't just talk.
Okay.
There was vandalism,
Uh-oh.
protests,
Really?
and a flurry of lawsuits challenging the deal.
You can't blame people for being upset.
No, you can't.
Imagine feeling like your city sold you out
Yeah,
for a quick buck.
it's tough.
But were any of those lawsuits successful?
So
Did anyone manage to put the brakes on this deal?
unfortunately, most of the legal challenges
Yeah.
hit a wall called
Yeah.
state action immunity.
State action immunity.
It's a legal doctrine
Uh-huh.
that basically shields government decisions
Okay.
from certain types of lawsuits.
All right.
In essence, it means that even if people disagree
Right.
with a government action,
Yeah.
they can't necessarily sue to overturn it.
So even if people felt like the deal was unfair
Right.
or harmful,
Uh-huh.
they had limited legal recourse.
They did.
That's got to be frustrating.
It was very frustrating for a lot of people.
But there was one lawsuit
There was.
that took a different approach,
Okay.
arguing that the deal violated the Sherman Antitrust Act.
The Sherman Antitrust Act.
Okay, now you're getting into legal territory.
Yeah,
That's a bit over my head.
sure.
Can you break down the Sherman Antitrust Act
I can try.
for us regular folks?
So essentially, the Sherman Antitrust Act is a law that
Yeah.
prohibits companies from monopolizing a market
Right.
and stifling competition.
Okay.
This lawsuit argued
Yeah.
that CPM LLC's control over the parking meters
Mm-hmm.
created a monopoly
Okay.
that hurt consumers.
So
Think about it.
like,
If there's only one company
yeah.
controlling all the parking meters in a city,
Right.
They have the power to set prices
Yeah, yeah.
however they want.
Okay.
There's no competition
Yeah,
to keep them in check.
that makes sense.
Yeah.
So this lawsuit was basically saying
Right.
that the parking meter deal created an unfair playing field
Yeah.
that ultimately harmed Chicago residents.
Exactly.
But even that lawsuit
Even that one.
was ultimately dismissed
It was.
by the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals.
The Seventh Circuit.
They acknowledged that the deal might have been a bad deal for Chicago,
They did.
but they upheld the city's right
Yeah.
to sell his parking meters.
It's complicated.
So even with all the public outcry
yeah.
and legal challenges, the deal stood.
The deal stood.
It seems like a classic example
Yeah.
of how powerful interests
Uh-huh.
can sometimes override the concerns of ordinary citizens.
It definitely raises questions about that.
It certainly does.
Yeah.
But one thing's for sure,
Okay.
this parking meter deal
Yes.
has been a lightning rod for criticism.
Big time.
What are some of the main criticisms
Well,
that have been leveled against it?
critics argue that it's been a financial disaster for Chicago,
Okay.
a cautionary tale about the pitfalls of privatization.
Right?
The Better Government Association,
The Better Government Association.
a watchdog group,
Right.
has been especially vocal, calling it a lesson in worst practices.
Wow.
They point to the lost revenue clause
Okay.
as a prime example
Right.
of how the deal hamstrung the city's ability
Yeah.
to manage its own streets.
I remember reading a report
Oh, yeah.
from the Better Government Association
Okay.
that highlighted how this deal
Yeah.
has hindered the city's ability to implement urban planning initiatives.
Yeah.
They argue that it's made it more difficult
Right.
to create pedestrian-friendly spaces at bike lanes or even host events
Yeah.
that might temporarily displace parking.
Exactly.
And it's not just about the practical implications.
Right.
There's also a symbolic dimension to all of this.
There is.
Some critics argue that this deal
Yeah.
essentially sold off a piece of Chicago's soul,
I've heard that too.
handing over control of a vital aspect
Right.
of the city's infrastructure
Uh-huh.
to a private company
Yeah.
that's ultimately accountable to its shareholders,
Exactly.
not to the residents of Chicago.
That's right.
It makes you wonder if a city can sell off its parking meters.
Yeah.
What's next?
What is next?
It's streetlights.
Uh-huh.
It's parks.
Right.
Where do you draw the line
That's the question.
between public and private interests?
That's the million-dollar question.
It is.
And it's one that cities all over the world are grappling with.
Wow.
The Chicago parking meter deal
Yeah.
serves as a cautionary tale,
Right.
a reminder that even seemingly mundane decisions
Mm-hmm.
can have profound and lasting consequences.
So we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
From the initial rationale for the deal
Yeah.
to the financial players involved to the legal challenges
Right.
and the criticisms that have been leveled against it. It's a complex
It is.
and multifaceted story.
It is.
But I think we're starting to get a clear picture
Yeah.
of how this seemingly simple parking meter deal
Right.
has become a symbol of much larger issues.
You're right. It's not just about parking anymore.
It's
It's about the balance of power.
Yeah.
The role of privatization and the long-term consequences
Right.
of decisions made in the name of short-term gain.
And it's a story that's still unfolding.
Very.
Even though the deal has been in place for over a decade,
Right.
its impact continues to be felt in Chicago today.
Absolutely.
But before we wrap up this deep dive,
Okay.
I want to shift gears for a moment
All right.
and turn the conversation over to you, the listener.
Okay.
What stands out to you about this story?
Yeah.
What questions do you have?
What insights have you gleaned?
We'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah.
You know, it's easy to get caught up
Yeah.
in the specifics of this Chicago parking meter deal.
Right.
But as we've been discussing, it really opens up a Pandora's box of questions about the bigger picture.
The big picture. Yeah.
What's fascinating here
Yeah.
is how this one deal shines a light
Right.
on this broader trend of privatizing public assets,
Absolutely.
a trend that's been playing out not just in Chicago,
No.
but in cities across the globe.
All over.
You're right.
Yeah.
Think about it.
Okay.
We're seeing private companies taking over things like toll roads,
Right.
water systems,
Right.
even prisons in some cases.
Citizens. Yeah.
It raises the question, what are the limits of privatization?
That's the question, isn't it?
Yeah.
There are valid arguments on both sides.
Right.
Proponents of privatization
Yeah.
often point to potential efficiency gains and cost savings.
Huh.
But the Chicago parking meter deal
Yeah.
serves as a cautionary tale,
Right.
reminding us that those short-term benefits can sometimes
Yeah.
come at a steep long-term price.
It's like that old saying, there's no such thing as a free lunch.
Yeah.
In this case, Chicago got its billion-dollar lunch up front,
Right.
but the city and its residents have been paying for it ever since.
Absolutely.
And that's the heart of the issue. When essential public services
Yeah.
are handed over to private companies,
Right.
the focus can shift from serving the public good to maximizing shareholder profit.
Right.
And those two goals aren't always aligned.
They're not.
The lost revenue clause.
Right.
Yeah, the Chicago deal is a perfect example.
It is.
It created a perverse incentive for the private company
Yeah.
to oppose anything that might reduce parking revenue,
Yeah.
even if those changes
Right.
would benefit the city as a whole.
Exactly. It highlights the potential for misaligned incentives
Okay.
when you introduce a profit motive
Yeah.
into the management of public assets.
So how do we navigate this complex landscape?
Yeah, that's the question.
How can cities balance the need for financial resources
Right.
with the responsibility to protect the public good?
It's a balancing act for sure.
It is.
And there's no one-size-fits-all solution.
Okay.
But I think the Chicago experience offers some valuable lessons.
Right.
For starters, transparency is crucial.
Transparency.
The more open and transparent the process,
Uh-huh.
the more likely it is
Yeah.
that potential downsides will be identified and addressed
Right.
before a deal is finalized.
And public engagement is essential.
Absolutely.
People need to feel like they have a voice in decisions that will affect their city
Yeah,
for generations to come.
for generations.
It can't just be a backroom deal between politicians and corporations.
You're hitting on a key point.
Okay.
The Chicago parking meter deal was shrouded in secrecy.
Right.
And that lack of transparency fueled a lot of the anger and distrust that followed.
It also raises the question of accountability.
Accountability, yeah.
If things go wrong,
Yeah.
who's responsible?
Who is?
Is it the city officials who signed the deal?
Right.
The private company that's managing the asset? Or the taxpayers?
Right.
Ultimately left holding the bag.
These are tough questions.
They are.
And they don't have easy answers.
Right.
But they're questions that we need to be asking as we confront this growing trend of privatization.
It's almost like we need a new set of rules for the 21st century.
Yeah.
A framework that recognizes the complexities
Right.
of public-private partnerships
Yeah.
and ensures that the public interest is always protected.
I think you're onto something.
Okay.
We need to move beyond
Yeah.
the simplistic framing of privatization good
Right.
versus privatization bad and develop a more nuanced understanding
Okay.
of the potential benefits and risks, the trade-offs involved,
Right.
and the long-term consequences.
This deep dive into Chicago parking meters
Yeah.
has been a real eye-opener.
It has.
It's a reminder that even the most mundane aspects of city life
Absolutely.
can reveal profound truths about power,
Oh.
money, and the challenges of governing
Right.
in a complex world.
It's a story that's still being written,
Yep.
and it's one that we all have a stake in.
We do.
As citizens, we need to be informed,
Yeah.
engaged, and willing to hold our leaders accountable for the decisions they make on our behalf.
So the next time you feed a parking meter, maybe you'll pause for a moment and reflect on the bigger picture,
The big
the intricate web of forces that shape our cities,
shape our city.
the balance of power between public and private interests,
Public and private.
and the long-term consequences of decisions that are often made with a short-term focus.
And who knows, maybe that moment of reflection will spark a conversation, a debate, or even a movement that helps us create a better future.
A better future.
For our cities and for all who call them home.
What a great point to end on.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
And we'll see you next time.